Today, we are going to build a modern original Xbox. We're going to use hardware backdoors to completely rework its software. We're going to salvage parts from a broken Xbox to give it a huge performance upgrade, and we're going to completely rework its design to make it over 35% smaller. Because let's face it, this thing is absolutely massive. You know, I still remember when the Xbox was originally announced, and I thought, oh, this is awesome. Finally, somebody is gonna bring the PC gaming experience to my living room. What we ended up getting fell a little bit short of my initial expectations. However, we still got a legendary game console that gave us hits like Halo and Fable. But using one of these devices in 2026 is a bit of a rough experience. It's really loud, it looks horrible on a modern TV, and basically all of these devices suffer from a serious design flaw that's literally rotting them from the inside out. So our mission today is to fix all of those issues, plus install a whole bunch of other upgrades and make this thing better than it ever was. But obviously, before we can do that, we need to tear this thing down. And the inside of the Xbox is a really cool place with a ton of interesting lore. At the end of the day, this thing is basically just a PC, and you're immediately reminded of that when you remove this top cover and see two off-the-shelf drives staring back at you. That hard drive on the right was a complete game changer back in the day. The Xbox was the first console ever to give you built-in, practically unlimited storage right out of the box. And I've got a fun upgrade planned here later. Digging further into the system, you're presented with the main motherboard. This thing holds a whole bunch of fun secrets, and we're gonna get into them soon, but as you can see, the inside of this Xbox is absolutely disgusting. So the first thing I did was take it into my backyard and dust it off with my electric duster, which is a really handy tool. So I'm gonna include a link for it and all the other stuff I'm gonna be using throughout this project down in the video description. Back on my bench, I was ready to start fixing some of the issues that plague these old systems. Over time, the thermal paste under these heat sinks dries out and basically turns into an epoxy. On the CPU, it isn't that big of a deal because the die is really small, but the GPU's is much larger, which makes removing its heatsink near impossible. I've actually heard of people completely destroying their motherboards by trying to pry them off. As it turns out, the only way to safely remove it is to first heat it up. Once you get it so hot that you can barely touch it, it should twist off without much of a fight. But we aren't done yet, because this stuff is completely immune to rubbing alcohol. So I ended up having to steal some of my wife's nail polish remover, which is an acetone-based solvent, and finally that started to break it down. Now, I'll apply some new high-performance paste later, but first we need to correct a serious design flaw that affects basically every Xbox. If you look closely at my motherboard, you can see that it's a bit fluffy, and that's because it's covered in a sticky acid that's slowly eating away at everything it touches. The source of this environmental disaster is this capacitor right here. The cool kids called this the clock capacitor, and its job, as the name might imply, is to keep track of time when your Xbox is turned off. So before we install any upgrades, I think first we need to fix this whole situation. Step one was thoroughly stripping off all the acid with more isopropyl alcohol. Getting in real close as I cleaned gave me a great opportunity to inspect all the surrounding board components, and thankfully, things here looked pretty good. Outside of some minor surface corrosion, I didn't see any major structural issues. So at this point, many people will opt to just remove the clock capacitor and call it a day. You can either desolder it like I am here, or just clip it off with a pair of side cutters. Technically, your Xbox doesn't need it to run, but to me, just removing it feels kind of lazy, so I ordered a complete kit of replacement capacitors, which might sound like overkill at first, but it was only 20 bucks, and as you'll soon see, I ended up needing more than just the one capacitor. Pro tip, by the way, the longer leg on board components is usually your positive terminal, so I threaded the new clock capacitor in place like so, flipped over the board, and then soldered it in place. And now my Xbox will finally stop bugging me for the date and time every time I turn it on. With that done, I switched gears and went into inspection mode, because where there's one bad capacitor, there's usually more. And sure enough, this guy right over here on the CPU's power rail is about to fail. You can tell because it's got a bulging top. Annoyingly, if you replace one of these capacitors, you should really do them all. So one at a time, they all had to come out. But there is a bit of a silver lining. First, I already had the replacements on hand, and second, you only have to install 3 replacements because these newer ones have a higher capacity. All of these contacts are connected to the same power rail too, so you get your choice of where to put them. I opted for these 3 slots because later I'm hoping that it'll give us slightly more room to maneuver when we're installing some other upgrades. So with our Xbox now fully restored to factory condition, next I want to turn your attention to the LPC port. These 15 contacts are the secret to unlocking your Xbox. Back during the Xbox's development, the LPC port was used for programming the console's BIOS. Now, unfortunately, on many retail Xboxes, these contacts come packed full of solder, so before we can tap into them and start having any fun, first we need to clear them out. This took me a little while to do, but once I did, I was ready to start installing some header pins. These pins will allow us to easily connect different mod chips to the Xbox. Mod chips come in many different flavors, but each one comes loaded with a custom BIOS that will allow you to do new and interesting things with your console. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because your mod chip won't even boot unless you install a wire down here on this contact known as D0. Grounding this data pathway during the boot process tells the Xbox to load whatever's connected to the LPC port. So one end of the wire gets connected to the motherboard, and then the other end gets soldered directly to our first mod chip, which is the XBlast Genie. This is actually a pretty basic mod chip with limited functionality. However, it has one very special feature that's going to be a huge asset for us during our next upgrade. But before we can start on that, a very important principle in console modding is that you should always test your work. So I plugged in the Xbox and held my breath as I attempted to boot something off of the LPC port for the very first time. So would you look at that? We are booted, which means that our repairs worked. And if you look really closely, you might notice that this home screen looks a little different. And that's because we're running XBlast OS off of the mod chip. We aren't going to spend a ton of time here, but XBlast is going to be hugely helpful for us when we're installing our next mod, which is kind of my white whale. For our next upgrade, it helps if you know a little bit of history. As the legend goes, early development units of the Xbox came with 128 megabytes of RAM, twice what the retail units ended up with. In a stroke of cost-cutting genius, Microsoft decided to simply remove half of the RAM chips while leaving the motherboards largely unchanged. So that means that if you're brave enough, you can actually double the amount of RAM in your Xbox. But also, that raises the question of where you'd even get new 20-year-old RAM chips. And for me, the answer is simple. I'm just gonna harvest them from one of my previous attempts. You see, I've actually tried to do this twice before without any luck, because this is a really hard mod. To kick things off, using my hot air station, I was able to simultaneously melt all 100 solder pads holding this RAM chip in place. After lifting it off the board, a lot of people will make the mistake of letting their chips cool too quickly, but rapid drops in temperature can lead to microfractures and all sorts of other problems. So it's important that you keep the heat flowing for a little bit. With that in mind, one pad at a time, I worked my way around the board and removed 4 16 megabyte modules. After giving them a quick clean, they were ready to be installed in their new home. And this is where things start to get difficult, but maybe not for the reasons that you're thinking. The initial alignment is a bit tricky, as you have to line up 100 pins pretty much perfectly, but once you've got the chip tacked in a couple of places, alignment becomes a non-issue. From there, it's just a matter of soldering each of these legs to the contacts on the motherboard. And as far as micro soldering goes, these connections aren't too bad. In fact, this first chip only took me about 15 minutes to do. The real challenge comes when you start checking your work. Here, I'm using the head of a pin to inspect each individual connection. Any movement means that the pin isn't properly soldered in place, and I have to go in and touch it up. But like I said, each RAM chip has 100 pins, so going through and testing them all takes quite a bit of time. As I start my second chip here, you're probably starting to understand why this mod is so challenging. 4 chips times 100 connections means that there are a combined 400 points of potential failure. If any one of those connections is bad, your Xbox essentially turns into a brick. And tracking down a bad connection is like trying to find a needle in a haystack. The last 2 times I attempted this mod, despite hours and hours of searching, I just couldn't find the source of my problems. But thankfully, this time we have a secret weapon. The XBlast is unique in that it allows your Xbox to boot with odd configurations of RAM. In fact, it even has a built-in tool specifically for doing RAM upgrades. And as you can see, my first 2 RAM chips passed the test, which made me pretty happy. Oh yeah. With that milestone under my belt, I started installing the next 2 chips. These ones go on the top side of the board where the difficulty ramps up a bit because there's just more stuff in the way. And also, I feel like I should point out that the XBlast isn't a silver bullet. It can't tell you exactly where your problem is, it can just help you narrow your search down to 1 of 4 paths. That being said, it is still hugely helpful and gave me the confidence to keep pushing forward, soldering pins, checking my work, and fixing any mistakes as I went. And after 2 long sessions, I was finally ready to reconnect the Xbox and test this mod, which I have been trying to do for over 2 years. 1, 2, But first, I actually have a big announcement. If you've ever watched one of my videos and wanted to learn to do this type of stuff at home, well, I have some great news for you because I have just rolled out the Modders Masterclass. It's 3 hours of high quality instructional content that teaches you everything you need to know from safe disassembly straight through to micro soldering. In fact, this very Xbox is featured in the course and I go way more in depth on all of these mods. Plus there's tool lists, tons of 3D print files, and direct access to Q&A with me to get help on all of your projects. Honestly, I've been working on this course for over a year now and I'm super excited to share it with you guys. So to celebrate the launch of the course, for the next 72 hours, you can use the code EARLYBIRD40 to save 40% off the cost of admission. But wait, there's more, because I am also going to be giving away the finished Xbox from this video. No purchase necessary, just enter your email and you'll be automatically entered into the drawing. And you might even get an additional discount code for the course. And now, getting back to our upgrade, I have some great news. 3? Yes! Oh, this mod almost broke me, so to see all 4 of those successes right there, this is a very good moment for me. Oh man, I'm pumped on that. So now that the RAM is done, we're actually going to ditch the XBlast Genie in favor of a much more advanced mod chip that's going to open up a whole ecosystem of new upgrades. This is Project Stellar. And for a mod chip, it is insanely advanced. It's got an OLED screen, more features than you can shake a stick at, and all of these ports for various expansion boards. But before we can even think about using any of those, first we need to remove that D0 wire, because Project Stellar comes with a cleaner solution. This little ribbon cable gets lowered in place and grounds D0 on this nearby capacitor instead. It's the same idea, but with way less mess. And now, installing our new mod chip is as easy as sliding it onto the LPC header. And with that, we can now leverage Project Stellar to fix one of the biggest problems with the original Xbox. And that's just that it looks horrible on modern TVs. And also, connecting it is a real pain in the ass. I mean, just look at this mess of wires. So my solution is the Xbox HD Plus. This little board adds a digital HDMI output that can be easily connected to any modern display. But installing it is every bit as challenging as the RAM upgrade. The first thing we have to do is remove the original AV port. And here, again, I'm using hot air to melt all the solder holding it in place. Except this time, I'm doing things properly and protecting all the nearby components with some heat shielding tape. Once you get it good and hot, the whole port should just pry off the board. Next, to get the cleanest possible video signal, we need to rework the Xbox's power delivery system. First, we remove this guy down here known as the ferrite bead. And then on the back side of the motherboard, we need to install the small QSB, which adds an additional layer of power smoothing for the video encoder. Then we've got to trick the Xbox into unlocking higher resolution output modes like 720p and 1080i. To do that, I'm soldering these tiny wires into 4 of the contacts where the AV port used to be. Effectively, these wires will make the Xbox think that an HD component cable has been plugged into the system. And then the hardest part of this install is just working with this bizarre little ribbon cable. This guy gets lowered down onto the analog video encoder, and its purpose is to steal every single pixel rendered by the GPU and route it up to our new and improved digital encoder that lives on the Xbox HD Plus. This gives us access to the cleanest uncompressed video stream possible and allows this mod to look so much better than your typical Xbox HDMI cable. But installing it is super annoying. The multi-arm design means that you're constantly struggling to get good alignment on these pins. It honestly took me more time than I care to admit, but eventually I did get them all soldered down. And after thoroughly testing all of my connections, I was able to do the very last step, which was soldering even more wires to where the AV port used to be. This time we're stealing both power and the digital audio signal for our new digital encoder. All 3 of these cables get routed up and then soldered directly to the main PCB. The ribbon cable connects like so, and then this short little extension cable routes back to the Project Stellar board and allows you to control your video output modes through Stellar OS, which is probably the best part about Project Stellar. But before I can even show it to you guys, first we need to test my soldering skills. Oh man, I can already tell from the menus alone that this new HDMI output looks so much better. Now we're gonna do some in-depth testing later, but for now, I actually have some more easy mods that I want to install. These ones won't require any micro soldering, but they are still gonna require some problem solving. One big issue with these old Xboxes is that they are incredibly loud. You can see that mine hits over 65 decibels while it's loading a game. And a big source of all that sound is this old mechanical hard drive. So easy mod number one is just replacing it with a modern SSD. This will dramatically reduce sound, improve load times, and give us way more storage, which we can exploit in some fun ways later. Unfortunately, you can't just plug in the new drive. The original drive uses an older and now defunct IDE interface. So the first thing we need is a translator. This adapter board here allows us to plug our new drive into the old interface. But that alone isn't enough. As it turns out, you also need an 80-wire IDE cable. Compared to the original, this new one is much better shielded, and that gives you a cleaner signal, which in turn allows you to unlock transfer speeds that are up to 3 times faster. Which is going to be a big deal soon, but for now, to temporarily install this new drive, I printed out this little adapter plate. This guy allows you to install the SSD right where the old mechanical drive used to go. And while we're on the subject of sound and performance, why don't we turn our attention to the fans? My Xbox is in early revision, which means that it has not one, but 2 dying fans that are making a ton of noise. Later Xboxes traded this smaller fan for a larger heatsink, and we'll talk more about that in a second, but for now, let's focus on the main fan. Here, Microsoft opted to use a proprietary 72mm design. So in order to replace it with this high-performance 60mm fan, we're gonna need an adapter. Thankfully, there's a bunch that you can download for free online. So after a quick print, I was able to easily install this newer and much quieter fan. And thankfully, Microsoft used standard fan headers, so connecting it was equally easy. Now, for the GPU's fan, it's a similar story. Because Microsoft used a proprietary mounting system, installing this new fan required a 3D printer bracket. But in retrospect, this might have been wasted filament because with a big modern SSD and a mod chip, I think we can safely get rid of the last noisy component. Okay, rapid fire recap time. After booting the system with the new drive installed, I used my mod chip to format it, and then using an FTP client, I transferred over a really cool piece of software. This is DVD to Xbox, and it allows you to rip games from the DVD drive onto our new SSD. This in turn allows games to boot quicker, and now that I've transferred over my entire collection of Xbox games, well, I don't really have much use for that drive anymore, which is probably a good thing because it's definitely about to die. Unfortunately, these old drives are a bit of a wear item, so putting it out of its misery was probably the kind thing to do. But this left me with a lot of free space directly above my GPU, and that gave me the idea that maybe I could install one of those larger heatsinks from a later Xbox. I was a little bit worried that the new mount wouldn't be compatible with my old motherboard, but thankfully it clipped right in place. And after taking a couple of measurements, I drafted up this new mount for the fan. Because it's going to be coming into direct contact with the heatsink, I printed this new mount in glass fiber reinforced ABS, which is heat resistant up to 100 degrees. The larger heatsink coupled with the upgraded fan should mean that our GPU runs significantly cooler. Or maybe we might just trade a bit of additional heat for some extra performance, because I just found out that you can overclock a modded Xbox. But we'll get to that later, because right now, with all of the changes that we've made, I think we've got a great opportunity to do something that Microsoft probably should have done 15 years ago. We can make ourselves an Xbox Slim. To kick off the process, I started by 3D scanning all of the parts. And then, after importing them into Fusion, I spent the better part of a week developing a new and more space-efficient case. I took the liberty of rearranging some internal components, but honestly, I didn't stray too far from the original design. After several rounds of prototyping, oh, hey, this looks pretty good, I was finally ready to print my finished design. This new case is over 35% smaller and should improve cooling thanks to some clever ducting. So, as always, if you want to download my design files and make your own Xbox Slim at home, you can scan the QR code on screen right now or check out the link in the video description. Now, unfortunately, with 3D printing, there's always a trade-off between speed and quality, so to get the best possible results, printing all of these parts was going to take me well over 48 hours, which gave me some time to work on some side quests. First, our new case wouldn't be complete without that iconic Xbox Jewel, but removing one of these things is actually kind of dangerous as it turns out. The first thing you have to do is remove the RF shielding, and here you can just kind of yank it out of there, but be careful because the edges of it are really sharp. Oh, also, ow, did I cut myself? Oh yeah, a little bit right there. Ask me how I know. And then once you have that out of the way, you need to loosen the adhesive that's holding it in place. This took me a little while to do because I was heating it from behind, but eventually, with enough patience, I did get it to pry free. And there she goes, she lifts away like so. Next, I want to show you guys one of my favorite new time savers. The SATA to IDE adapter came with a lot of unnecessary wires, so to clean things up, I wanted to wire it directly to the PSU. And in order to speed up that process, I'm going to be using these cool heat shrink connectors. These guys have a ring of low temperature solder in them, so once you slide them over your spliced wires, all you have to do is heat them up. The plastic part shrinks, the solder melts, and you're left with an airtight seal and a really strong connection. And just then, as I was admiring my work, my doorbell rang and the postman dropped off a very special package. You see, a few months ago, I pre-ordered an upgraded version of Project Stellar, aptly named Project Stellar Plus. This new version features an ESP32 board, which adds both Bluetooth controller support and Wi-Fi. And as you can see, I also ordered a few other things as well. But first, let's just get this new mod chip installed. Unfortunately, in order to support all of those new features, Stellar Plus needs to tap into some additional data lines. And you guessed it, that means more micro soldering. Thankfully, this round was relatively simple. All I had to do was connect this flex cable to a few surface contacts, bridge it onto some nearby capacitors, and then finally add some structural support by attaching it to this ground plane. Then the ribbon cable wraps around to the top side of the board where it connects to the mod chip, and then that slides onto the LPC header just like before. And now we are ready to do something that I have never dared to do before on one of these projects. We're gonna add some RGB. This is the Stellar RGB kit, and in addition to replacing the Xbox's factory LEDs, it also adds a whole bunch of new ones. We've got 7 for each controller port, as well as a big ring of LEDs that I'll have to MacGyver into my lid. And speaking of MacGyvering, installing the controller port LEDs requires some pretty invasive modifications. First, you have to pry off these metal cages surrounding the controller ports. On my Xbox, they were actually soldered together, so this required a good deal of force. Next, you need to find a way to remove this tab which covers the rear of the ports. I found the simplest way to do this was just by flexing the metal until it snapped off. With this piece out of the way, the LEDs are now free to shine through the controller ports and out the front of the console. Following that, you need to flatten out these 2 smaller tabs on either side of the housing and then reinstall them back on the controller ports, which is easier said than done now that they're all twisted up. After you've done this 4 times, you can then take the controller port PCBs and gently force them onto those freshly bent tabs. It might take a little bit of persuasion, but eventually they should click in place. And then to permanently lock everything together, you can apply some solder to those slots. No need to overdo it here, all you need is some little tack welds to keep the PCBs from slipping off. And just then, after almost 2 full days of printing, my case was finally ready. And to say that I was more than a little excited would be an understatement. Oh man, look at how good this thing looks. I cannot wait to build the Xbox inside of here. I know I'm an overexcited kid here, but you also have to understand that I have been working on this project for literal years. After many late nights and false starts, I was finally putting together the Xbox that I had always dreamed of building. This project pushed me in ways that I never expected, and part of me wondered if I might not ever finish it. But here it was. It was all coming together just like I had planned, and I even saved a few bonus features for the final assembly here, like this little drive caddy that suspends the new SSD perfectly in place. Or how about these customizable little nameplates that dovetail right into the front panel and allow for a bit of personalization? And yeah, don't worry, I also included some blank ones along with the rest of the 3D print files. And then I also made the last minute decision to rework the top of the case so that I could feature a small section made of transparent plastic. This allowed me to mount the Stellar RGB ring kit directly below the Xbox's jewel so that it could be illuminated. Again, I'm not normally much of an RGB guy, but if you're gonna do it, you might as well do it right. After connecting the ring light, I lowered the top in place, flipped the Xbox over, and screwed it together in much the same way as the original case. And finally, after all of that, I was ready to test out my new Xbox Pro. And right away, as soon as it boots, you are greeted with the XBMC for Gamers homepage. This is a custom launcher that I installed that handles launching different apps, all of your games, emulators, and even homebrew software. I actually found this cool version of the original Half-Life that's specifically made for Xboxes with 128 megabytes of RAM. And that's just scratching the surface of all the cool homebrew software that you can run on these original Xboxes. The additional RAM also really helps when you're running emulators. I've been playing both N64 and PlayStation titles without any issue. And speaking of upgrades, the graphics look so much better thanks to that Xbox HD Plus. Here's a side-by-side comparison of the original Halo. Not only is the image crisper with zero interlacing artifacts, but you can see that there's also way more dynamic range. Just look at the shadows in this scene. There's way more detail because everything isn't getting crushed during the analog conversion. And if that wasn't enough of a visual upgrade for you, just wait until you see Halo 2 HD. This is a special community-made version of Halo 2 that takes advantage of all of our upgrades. Instead of the default 480p, this version runs at 720p and needs the extra RAM to support that higher resolution. It also utilizes our upgraded drive to load levels quicker and reduce pop-in as well. But probably the coolest feature of Halo 2 HD is that it has a built-in overclocking tool that can increase performance by as much as 10 frames per second. Outside of that, you can use a tool called Xbox OC to overclock the Xbox in any game. Our upgraded cooling system keeps thermals in check without an issue, and probably my favorite feature is that this Xbox is now whisper quiet. You can't even hear it above the noise floor in my room. Another game changer is the inclusion of wireless controller support thanks to the Stellar Plus. Here I've got both my Xbox Series X controller and my 8BitDo Ultimate 2 connected at the same time. Not only are wireless controllers more convenient, but their modern ergonomics are so much better than the original controllers. So that is it for my modern Xbox. And as much as I love it, I'm also very excited to give it away to one of you guys at home to celebrate the launch of my course. Again, you can scan the QR code on screen right now or check out the link down in the video description. Not only will you get a chance to win this Xbox, but you're also going to get a hefty discount on my Modders Masterclass, which will teach you everything you need to know to do these types of modifications to your own game systems at home.